Culture is ingrained within the fabric of our society.
The year of not having culture has really illustrated its importance.
Where we are now is very much a cultural sector at crisis point.
The Centre for Cultural Value is really a place for many people to come together across different divides to think about the value that creativity brings to people's lives.
We want our research to be useful, to be used by the cultural sector, to inform policy making so it's more evidence-based. Once the pandemic hit, there was a thirst for real-time insight into what was happening to the cultural sector. Culture in Crisis is a report of a national research project to explore the impact of Covid-19 on the UK's cultural sector.
We really needed to get beyond the narrow view of individual organisations, and we were particularly keen to do a piece of research which told us about what was going on in the whole population.
We very quickly were able to get together a national consortium involving two core partners. So the first was the Audience Agency and the second was the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre.
Amongst the team, we had people working on quantitative data analysis. We also had, of course, a lot of interviewing, and we had the Audience Agency's population monitor, which could bring in that kind of really quick, rapid response, real-time data.
We had researchers virtually placed in local councils, and that meant that we could work in a really iterative way. So it meant that policymakers were feeding in to our research questions as the research developed.
It was incredibly useful to get a sense of what kind of questions were sort of driving the policy response.
It gave us a really credible and robust insight into the impact on the workforce, on audiences, and also cultural organisations and creative practitioners.
The data and the evidence on the changes to the workforce have really identified where there have been inequalities that have been exacerbated.
Amongst the cultural workforce, we saw younger workers leaving the sector. People from ethnic minorities were disproportionately hit.
Things like theatre, live music saw really big reductions in the size of their workforce. For those parts of the cultural sector that were able to access the furlough scheme, it really, really worked. Where it didn't work were for freelancers, sole traders, individuals working within the creative economy. This wasn't supporting the majority of cultural and creative workers during this time.
The question that has come out of our research really is, what constitutes a successful cultural ecology? What are the different factors? And one of the findings from our research is that networks are absolutely key to resilience. Our ecosystem analysis of Greater Manchester, for example, showed that when you've got those really strong tie networks, information is spread very quickly.
They were able to kind of group together and make rapid responses, commissioning micro-commissions, supporting shared programming and doing all kinds of things.
So we saw venues in Manchester close down much more rapidly and effectively than venues in the rest of the UK.
It became clear that we were not going to be able to do any in-person screenings or events.
There was a scrabbling round to get everything online. We really hoped and thought that digital distribution would radically shift the demographics of who historically has engaged with cultural content, and sadly that really didn't seem to transpire.
What it did do was to increase frequency and engagement among those already interested. So we didn't see whole new swathes of people engaged, but we did see greater activity from younger, more diverse urban audiences.
The greatest understanding that this research could offer was about understanding the confidence levels amongst audiences.
Shifting perceptions, how people were feeling about engaging with digital content or engaging live when venues were able to open.
All the way through, we saw a very, very similar pattern. About a third of people quite keen to get back out there, about a third of people really quite anxious and requiring a lot of support and so on, and the last third saying, no, not going anywhere until I know that there's absolutely no risk whatsoever.
I wasn't surprised by one of the findings in the report that I think it was 80% of respondents said the arts was really important to their mental health.
Culture sits in an important emotional place in people's lives.
People during lockdown actually turned to cultural and creative practices and activities just to improve their well-being.
It's the social aspects of creative engagement that were particularly important to get them through those difficult times.
One of our key findings was what we've called a pivot to civic. We saw organisations really engaging with their local communities.
To have community impact, to be more kind of locally embedded.
There were some wonderful examples, of course, of cultural organisations using their brilliant production skills and logistics skills to roll out food banks, for example, to send out creative kits to local communities.
In some ways, the pandemic has helped to reveal the value of arts and culture to people in ways that they perhaps hadn't realised before.
The insight that this particular research has offered us has meant that we were able to have very informed and credible and robust conversations with the Department for Culture and Media and Sport and central government.
If there hadn't have been significant policy intervention, we might not have a cultural sector to be recovering. And indeed, even within that significant policy intervention, so things like Cultural Recovery Fund, there were still organisations and individuals that were left out.
And we need to understand why those disparities exist and what we can do to make sure that the playing field is level for no matter who you are to engage in arts and culture overall.
The research has really been a game changer for the Centre for Cultural Value.
I'm really hopeful that some of our findings are going to be able to contribute distinctively to the Levelling Up agenda and how we think about where investment goes, who has access to public cultural funds in the future.
I was in touch with the research team throughout last year, and it felt like our voices were heard, and the results of the report definitely reflect my personal experience as well as colleagues' experiences.
A much more kind of attentive and active interest in inequalities in creative work is really necessary.
It was really important that we both record these experiences and also feed them back so that there is greater knowledge from national policymakers and local policymakers.
It's acted as a catalyst for not only individuals but organisations as well to come together and share and learn from each other.
The question is, will it seize the opportunity to do things differently, to be more regenerative, to be more sustainable, to keep maintaining those relationships with local audiences and local communities?